"Mom, why did you kick me out?" said the abandoned girl, but a millionaire saw her and did something that changed everyone's life forever. Watch until the end. Comment telling me what you thought of this story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked my story, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The March sun punished the asphalt of the road that cut through Crystal Creek, when Chloe, only 4 years old, sat right in the middle of the dusty lane, her tears mixing with the sweat that ran down her dirty little face. Her green eyes, too big for her thin face, stared at the horizon as she repeated the same question that had tormented her for 3 days. "Where's my mommy?" The girl wore only a faded pink t-shirt and torn panties, her bare feet already bruised by the stones on the ground. David Davenport's silver pickup truck kicked up a cloud of dust as it braked sharply just a few feet from the child. The 45-year-old businessman, owner of 3 building supply stores in the region, got out of the vehicle with his heart racing. His graying hair was wet with sweat, and his hands trembled slightly as he approached the girl. "What are you doing out here all alone, little one?" he asked, crouching down to be at Chloe's level. The child stared at him with those green eyes that seemed to carry a sadness much greater than her 4 years of life. "My mommy went away and said I have to stay here until she comes back," Chloe murmured, her voice hoarse from crying so much. "But it's been a long time, and she's not coming back." David looked around, trying to understand the situation. The road was completely deserted, surrounded only by dry pastures and a few simple houses in the distance. The heat was suffocating, and the girl was clearly dehydrated and hungry. Without a second thought, he picked her up and carried her into the air-conditioned truck. "What's your name?" he asked, offering a bottle of water that Chloe drank desperately. "Chloe. My mom is Valerie and my stepfather is Rick," she answered between gulps. "They fought a lot, and then Mommy brought me here and said I had to wait." During the drive to his house, David managed to get more information from the girl. Apparently, Valerie had discovered that Rick had lost all the family's money on gambling debts, and in the heat of the moment, she threw Chloe out of the house, leaving her on the road as if she were to blame for the adults' problems. The Davenport mansion was in the best neighborhood of Crystal Creek, an imposing structure with well-kept gardens and a pool that sparkled under the sun. When David arrived with Chloe in his arms, his wife Martha, a 42-year-old woman with impeccably styled blonde hair, came out to greet them. "David, who is this child?" Martha asked, frowning. Her voice had an icy tone that made Chloe shrink even more into the man's arms. "I found her abandoned on the road. We couldn't just leave her there," he replied, entering the house despite his wife's disapproving look. Martha observed Chloe with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. For 15 years she had been trying unsuccessfully to get pregnant, and the presence of this child awakened contradictory feelings in her heart. On one hand, she felt compassion for the abandoned girl. On the other, her presence was a painful reminder of her own inability to have children. "She needs a bath and clean clothes," Martha finally said, her practical nature taking over. "And food. She's clearly malnourished." While Martha prepared a bath for Chloe, the girl observed everything around her with wide eyes. She had never seen such a beautiful house, with shiny furniture, soft carpets, and pictures on the walls. It was like stepping into one of the fairy tales her grandma Connie used to tell before she went to the hospital and never came back. After the bath, dressed in one of Martha's nightgowns that had been improvised as a dress, Chloe sat at the kitchen table. Martha placed a plate before her with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and salad, more food than the girl had seen together in weeks. "Slowly, little one," Martha said, watching Chloe devour the food desperately. "You'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast." It was then that something surprising happened. Chloe noticed that the tablecloth had some loose threads, and without thinking, she began to weave them with impressive dexterity. In a few minutes, she had created a small embroidered flower. "How did you learn to do that?" Martha asked, genuinely impressed. "Grandma Connie taught me. She used to say that hands that know how to embroider never go wanting," Chloe replied, smiling for the first time since she arrived. Martha felt something stir inside her chest. She herself loved embroidery, but she had never met such a young child with such skill. Perhaps this girl wasn't just a problem to be solved. That night, Chloe slept in the guest room, in a soft bed with fragrant sheets. Before falling asleep, she asked softly, "Do you think my mommy will come back tomorrow?" David and Martha looked at each other, not knowing what to say. How could they explain to a 4-year-old that her mother might never come back? The first few days of Chloe's stay at the Davenport house were a mix of enchantment and longing. The girl marveled at every detail of the luxurious life, the toys Martha bought for her, the color television, the abundant food. But every night, before sleeping, she asked the same question about her mother. Martha, little by little, grew attached to the child. She taught Chloe new embroidery stitches, and together they created small works of art that Martha carefully saved. The girl had a thirst for learning that deeply touched the heart of the woman who had never had children. David also grew fond of Chloe. He would come home from work eager to hear her talk about her day, and on weekends he would take her for walks around town, showing her the traditional pottery of Crystal Creek and telling her stories about the region. For 2 months, they lived as an unlikely but harmonious family. Chloe began to call Martha Aunt Martha and David Uncle Dave, and she seemed to be finally adapting to her new life. But the peace was short-lived. On a May morning, as Chloe played in the garden, a thin, poorly dressed woman appeared at the gate. It was Valerie, with disheveled hair and shabby clothes, accompanied by Rick, a burly man with small, cruel eyes. "My daughter!" Valerie shouted, pushing the gate open. "Where is my daughter?" Chloe ran into the house, frightened by her mother's sudden appearance. Martha appeared at the main door, blocking their entry. "What do you want here?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "I want my daughter back," Valerie declared, trying to get past Martha. "You have no right to keep her." David arrived quickly, drawn by the shouting. When he saw Rick, he felt a chill. There was something in that man's eyes he didn't like at all. "I got a job as a cleaner at the hospital," Valerie lied, avoiding looking directly at Chloe, who was hiding behind Martha's legs. "I can take care of her now." But Chloe didn't want to go. She had found safety and affection in the Davenport house, and Rick's presence terrified her. The stepfather looked at her in a way that made her tremble, as if she were some kind of property. The argument intensified when David offered financial help so Valerie could create suitable conditions for Chloe. But Rick aggressively intervened, demanding they take the girl right then and there. "She's ours, not yours," he snarled, advancing toward the house. In that tense moment, with Chloe crying and clinging to Martha's legs, and Valerie seeming torn between what was right and what Rick demanded of her, the moment that would change everything arrived. David, desperate to keep Chloe safe, made an offer that left everyone in shock. $50,000, David said in a firm voice, looking directly into Valerie's eyes. "Leave Chloe with us, and I'll give you $50,000 so you can start your life over, away from all this." The silence that followed was deafening. Valerie's eyes widened, clearly tempted by an amount of money greater than she had ever seen in her life. Rick, on the other hand, stepped forward, his eyes shining with greed. $100,000, he retorted immediately. "The girl is worth $100,000. Martha felt nauseous hearing Rick negotiate Chloe as if she were merchandise. The child, still clinging to her legs, trembled so much she seemed to have a fever. How could someone turn an already traumatic situation into such a sordid bargain? No, Valerie said suddenly, surprising everyone. Chloe is my daughter. I'm not going to sell her like an animal. She turned to the child with a choked voice. Let's go, sweetie. Mommy came to get you. Chloe clung even tighter to Martha, beginning to cry desperately. I don't want to go, Aunt Martha. Please don't let me go. Martha's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. For 2 months she had grown attached to this girl in a way she hadn't thought possible. Chloe had filled a void in her life she didn't even know existed. And now, watching the child being taken away was like having her own heart ripped from her chest. Valerie, please, Martha begged, her tears starting to flow. Look at her. She's happy here with us. She has a stable life, education, affection. She has a mother, Valerie shouted, but her voice carried more desperation than conviction. I'm her mother. I may not have money, but I have love to give. Rick, annoyed by the delay, advanced toward Chloe and grabbed her arm forcefully. Enough of this nonsense. Let's go now. Don't hurt me, Chloe screamed, trying to break free. David immediately placed himself between Rick and the girl. Take your hands off her. I will not allow you to hurt a child in my house. You're not in charge of anything here, Rick snarled, pushing David. The girl is ours. The situation was escalating dangerously when a familiar voice interrupted the argument. What's going on here? It was Arthur, David's junior partner in the building supply stores. The 38-year-old man had arrived for a business meeting and found this chaos at his friend's gate. When his eyes landed on Valerie, his face went completely pale. Valerie, he murmured as if seeing a ghost. Arthur, she replied, equally shocked. What are you doing here? David looked from one to the other, confused. You two know each other. What happened next was like a bomb exploding in the middle of the already chaotic situation. Arthur lowered his head, clearly ashamed, and said in an almost inaudible voice, She's my sister. The impact of this revelation was immense. David felt as if he had been punched in the gut. His partner, with whom he had worked for 5 years, had hidden the fact that he was the brother of Chloe's mother. Why? What else was Arthur hiding? Your sister? David repeated, his voice filled with disappointment and anger. And you didn't think it was important to tell me that when I brought an abandoned child home? Arthur held up his hands, trying to explain. I didn't know it was Chloe. I lost contact with Valerie years ago, when she got involved with this guy, he said, pointing at Rick with disgust. I tried to help, but she pushed me out of her life. Valerie exploded. You judged me. You abandoned me when I needed you most, and now you show up here pretending to care? I do care, Arthur shouted back. That's why I cut ties with you. I couldn't watch my sister destroy herself for this lowlife. Rick, who had remained silent during the family revelation, now advanced threateningly toward Arthur. Watch your words, buddy. You don't know me. I know men like you all too well, Arthur replied, unintimidated. Leeches who live off vulnerable women. The tension between the men was palpable, but it was interrupted by a sound that broke everyone's hearts. Chloe had started having a panic attack. The girl was breathing rapidly, her small hands trembling uncontrollably, and she was obsessively repeating, I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. Martha immediately knelt beside the child, trying to calm her. Breathe with me, sweetheart, slowly. I'm right here with you. Valerie watched the scene with tears in her eyes, clearly torn between what her heart was telling her and what Rick was demanding. It was obvious that Chloe was better off with the Davenports, but as a mother, how could she just hand her over to strangers? Valerie, Arthur said, cautiously approaching his sister, look at her. Look at how our niece is suffering. Do you really think you're doing what's best for her? Don't tell me what's best for my daughter, Valerie replied, but her voice was broken. You abandoned me, remember? When I needed my brother, where were you? Rick, realizing he was losing control of the situation, decided to play dirty. Enough of this talk. The girl comes with us now, or I'm going to the police station and reporting you for kidnapping. David turned to him with fury in his eyes. Kidnapping! I saved this child from death. She was abandoned in the middle of the road. Prove it, Rick challenged with a cruel smile. Who's going to believe you when I tell them you stole a child from her mother? It was at this moment that the situation took a completely unexpected turn. Chloe, who had calmed down slightly, looked directly at Valerie and said with a crystal-clear voice that cut through the air like a blade, "Mommy, why did you go away and leave me alone on the road? I waited for you to come back, but you didn't come back." The impact of these innocent words was devastating. Valerie collapsed in sobs, finally confronted with the reality of what she had done. In her own version of the story, she had convinced herself that Chloe was temporarily in a safe place, but hearing the raw truth from her own daughter destroyed her from the inside. I didn't mean to. I was desperate." Valerie babbled between tears. Arthur seized his sister's moment of vulnerability. "Valerie, you can visit her whenever you want. The Davenports are good people. They'll take good care of her. Give her the chance to have a life we never had." But just when it seemed Valerie might give in, Rick showed his true colors. "If you leave the girl here, you can't count on me anymore. I'm leaving, and you can fend for yourself." The emotional blackmail worked. Valerie, terrified at the idea of being completely alone in the world, wiped her tears and hardened her face. "Chloe, let's go. Now." Martha grew desperate. "Valerie, please, at least let her say goodbye, get her things." "She doesn't need anything from here," Rick said sharply, forcibly picking Chloe up. The girl screamed and struggled, calling for Martha, but he held her tight. "Mommy, I don't want to go. I want to stay with Aunt Martha," Chloe cried desperately. Valerie couldn't look her daughter in the eye. "You'll get used to it. We're a family." Arthur made one last attempt. "Valerie, don't do this. You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life." But Rick was already walking toward the street with Chloe in his arms, and Valerie followed with hesitant steps, without looking back. David and Martha stood frozen at the gate, watching the child they had learned to love be taken away like an object. Chloe's screams echoed down the street until the group disappeared around the corner. Arthur remained silent beside his friends for a few minutes, all of them processing what had just happened. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I should have told you she was my sister from the beginning." Martha ran into the house, no longer able to hold back her tears. David followed her, leaving Arthur alone in the garden, questioning every decision he had made in recent years. Inside the house, Martha locked herself in what had been Chloe's room and cried until she couldn't anymore. The embroidery they had made together was scattered on the bed, painful reminders of a happiness that had lasted so little time. That night, none of them could sleep, imagining where Chloe was and if she was safe. What they didn't know was that the girl's real ordeal was just beginning. The wooden shack behind Old Man Hemlock's abandoned pottery works smelled of mold and rat droppings. Chloe huddled in the corner of the dirty mattress she shared with Valerie, watching cockroaches scurry through the cracks in the poorly fitted planks. 3 weeks had passed since she'd been torn from Martha's arms, and the reality of her new life struck her every day with the force of a hammer. Rick snored on the floor beside them, an empty bottle of cheap whiskey rolling near his bare feet. The stench of alcohol and sweat emanating from him made Chloe feel nauseous. She had learned to breathe through her mouth when he was around, trying not to vomit. "Mommy," she whispered to Valerie, who was pretending to sleep with her eyes squeezed shut. "Can I go back to Aunt Martha's house? I promise to be a good girl." Valerie felt a stab in her chest, but she didn't answer. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that there was no going back? How could she say that she had chosen a man who mistreated her over giving her own daughter a chance at a decent life? The dawn brought with it a new torture. Rick woke up in a bad mood and with no money for alcohol, which meant Chloe would be forced to beg on the streets once more. He had discovered that a pretty, well-spoken child could get more handouts than any adult. "Go on, girl," he ordered, pushing Chloe out of the shack. "And don't come back here without at least $20. The town is full of tourists for the Harvest Festival." Chloe staggered out into the streets of Crystal Creek, her bare feet treading on the hot asphalt. She had been wearing the same dirty clothes for days, and her hair was tangled and smelled sour. It was hard to believe that 3 weeks earlier she had slept in clean, fragrant sheets. The town centre was bustling with preparations for the annual Harvest Festival. Colourful stalls were being set up in the main square, and the smell of local foods made Chloe's empty stomach rumble painfully. She hadn't eaten a decent meal since she left the Davenport house. "Mister, do you have some change to buy food?" she asked a gentleman passing by, using the phrase Rick had taught her. The man looked at her with pity and handed her 2 coins. It was humiliating. Chloe remembered how Martha would take her to the supermarket and let her choose the snacks she wanted. Now she depended on the charity of strangers to keep from starving. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Martha was going through the worst period of her life. Unable to sleep properly for weeks, she had developed anxiety attacks that woke her up in the middle of the night with her heart pounding. The doctor had prescribed sleeping pills, but she had been increasing the dosage on her own, trying to escape the pain of losing Chloe. David watched his wife deteriorate day by day, feeling powerless. He had tried to hire a lawyer to legally seek custody of Chloe, but the chances were minimal as Valerie was the biological mother and there was no concrete proof of mistreatment. "I have to find her," Martha would mutter obsessively, pacing back and forth in the living room. "I need to know if she's okay." And so, on a Thursday morning, David and Martha went out into the streets of Crystal Creek looking for Chloe. They couldn't have imagined the deplorable state in which they would find her. The girl was sitting on the sidewalk in front of the downtown church, her eyes glazed over and a dry cough that hadn't gotten better in days. When Martha saw her, she could barely recognize her. Chloe had lost a frightening amount of weight. Her skin was pale, and there were sores on her little arms, probably from insect bites in the unsanitary shack where she lived. "Dear God," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What have they done to you, my girl?" Chloe looked up and saw the couple she had learned to love as parents. For a moment, her little face lit up with hope, but it quickly faded. Rick had told her that if she told anyone about her living conditions, something worse would happen. "Aunt Martha," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Martha knelt on the sidewalk, not caring about dirtying her expensive clothes, and hugged Chloe with all her strength. "I'm here, sweetheart. Mommy Martha is here." The word mommy slipped naturally from Martha's lips, revealing how much she had grown attached to the child. David felt a lump in his throat, seeing the 2 of them hugging, Chloe so small and fragile in his wife's arms. "Where are you living, little one?" David asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Chloe looked around nervously. "I can't say. Rick said something bad will happen if I talk." Martha's heart broke once again. "No one is going to hurt you, my love. Tell Auntie where you are." After much gentle persuasion, Chloe revealed the address of the shack. David and Martha looked at each other, horrified. They knew that area. It was where the abandoned grounds of the old pottery works were, a dangerous and unsanitary place. "We're going to get you out of there," Martha promised, but Chloe shook her head, frightened. "You can't. Mommy Valerie needs me. Rick said that if I don't help, he'll leave, and she'll be all alone." The psychological manipulation that a 4-year-old was suffering was revolting. Rick had managed to make Chloe feel responsible for Valerie's well-being, placing on her small shoulders a burden that not even an adult should have to carry. That afternoon, David made a brave decision. He and Martha went to the shack behind the abandoned pottery works to confront Valerie and Rick personally. What they found there surpassed their worst expectations. The place was a true den of misery. There was no running water, electricity, or any basic sanitation. Valerie was lying on a filthy mattress, clearly ill, while Rick counted coins Chloe had begged for. "My God, Valerie," David said, shocked. "How can you raise a child in these conditions?" Rick stood up threateningly. "Get out of here. You have no right to be here." "Yes, we do," Martha retorted firmly. "Chloe is clearly in danger. Look at the state she's in." It was then that they discovered something that completely changed the perspective of the whole situation. Arthur arrived at the shack shortly after them, having followed the couple discreetly. He brought with him documents he had found in the apartment where Valerie used to live. "David," Arthur said in a heavy voice, "I need to tell you something about the money Rick lost gambling." Rick turned pale when he saw the papers in Arthur's hands. "Shut up!" he yelled, lunging at his brother-in-law. "He didn't lose the money gambling," Arthur continued, dodging Rick. "He stole the settlement money Valerie received when her first husband died in the mill accident. $50,000 that were meant to secure Chloe's future." The impact of this revelation was like a bomb exploding. Valerie, even sick, managed to sit up on the mattress, looking at Rick with growing horror in her eyes. "It's a lie!" Rick screamed, but his desperation betrayed him. "He's making this up." "I have the bank statements right here," Arthur said, showing the documents. "An account opened under a false name, transactions that perfectly match the disappearance of the money." Valerie began to cry convulsively. That money was all she had to ensure Chloe had a better future. It was the result of the blood spilled by the girl's father, transformed into hope for his daughter. And Rick had stolen it all. "You lied to me," Valerie sobbed. "You said you lost it gambling, but you actually stole it from my daughter." Rick, seeing he had been unmasked, completely changed his tactic. "So what? That money was just sitting there for years. At least I tried to multiply it." "Multiply it?" Arthur exploded. "You were planning to run. I found a one-way bus ticket out of state, hidden in your wallet." The truth finally came out. Rick had never loved Valerie or cared about Chloe. He had only gotten close to the family to steal the settlement money and plan his escape. Valerie and Chloe were just means to an end. But just when it seemed the situation would finally be clarified, a new problem arose. Rick, cornered and desperate, made one last move that would put all their lives at even greater risk. Rick grabbed Chloe by the arm and pulled her close, his eyes gleaming with the desperation of a cornered animal. "If you report me, I'll tell the whole town you kidnapped a child. I'll spread rumors that the rich David Davenport has a questionable interest in little girls." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Everyone understood the gravity of that threat. In a small town like Crystal Creek, such rumors could completely destroy a family's reputation, whether they were true or not. David felt his blood run cold. "You wouldn't dare," he murmured, but he knew Rick was capable of anything. "Try reporting me and find out," Rick snarled, squeezing Chloe's arm even tighter, causing her to cry out in pain. It was in that moment that Valerie, even weak and sick, found a strength she didn't know she had. Seeing her daughter suffering at the hands of the man who had stolen her future, something inside her broke. "Let her go," Valerie said, shakily getting up from the mattress. "Let my daughter go now." "Shut up, Valerie. You're not in charge here," Rick shouted, but something in her voice made him hesitate. "I said, let her go," Valerie repeated, this time with a firmness that surprised even herself. "Enough, it's over. You destroyed our lives, stole my daughter's money, and now you want to use her as a shield?" Rick, realizing he was losing his grip on Valerie, made the most cowardly decision possible. He violently shoved Chloe against the shack wall and ran, taking with him the backpack where he kept his fake documents and the little money that was left. Chloe hit her head on the wooden wall and collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Martha threw herself over the girl, desperately checking if she was breathing. "Call an ambulance!" she screamed at David, who was already dialing on his cell phone. Arthur ran after Rick, but the man knew the town's alleys and back streets well, disappearing like a shadow among the abandoned buildings of the old pottery works. At the hospital, while the doctors examined Chloe, a new revelation struck the family like lightning. Dr. Evans, the pediatrician attending to the girl, called Valerie and the Davenports for a private conversation. Besides the contusion on her head, which thankfully isn't serious, we discovered something during the tests, he said with a serious expression. Chloe is severely malnourished and shows signs of acute psychological stress, but there's something else. He paused, looking directly at Valerie. I need to ask a delicate question. Are you sure you are this child's biological mother? Valerie turned pale. What do you mean? The blood tests show some inconsistencies that caught my attention. Also, the girl mentioned a Grandma Connie several times. Can you tell me about this person? It was then that Valerie, too weak to keep lying and having carried the weight of the truth for so long, finally broke down. Through her tears, she told the story she had hidden for 4 years. Chloe isn't my biological daughter, she whispered. She's my younger sister, Jessica's daughter. When Chloe was born, Jessica was going through serious drug problems and asked me to take care of the baby temporarily. She said she was going to São Paulo to get treatment and would come back for her daughter. David and Martha looked at each other, shocked by yet another twist in this already turbulent story. But she never came back, Valerie continued. She sent a letter saying she had gotten clean and found a good job, but that she thought it was better for me to continue raising Chloe because she didn't feel ready to be a mother. The address she left turned out to be fake when I tried to contact her. Why did you never tell anyone this? Arthur asked. Because I already loved Chloe as if she were my own daughter, and because I was afraid someone would try to take her from me if they knew I wasn't her real mother. Dr. Evans asked a few more questions and suggested a DNA test to definitively clarify the situation. But before they could make any decision, a nurse appeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a lady here who says she's a relative of the girl. She's very upset and insists on speaking with you. When they reached the reception, everyone was in a state of shock. A woman of about 30, with brown hair and the same green eyes as Chloe, was standing in the middle of the hallway. In her hands, she held a small handmade teddy bear. Jessica, Valerie murmured as if seeing a ghost. Hi, Val, the woman said, tears streaming down her face. I've come for my daughter. The impact of this appearance was monumental. Jessica explained that she had spent 2 years in a rehabilitation clinic in São Paulo and had been working to achieve financial stability. When she finally felt ready to be a mother, she returned to Crystal Creek discreetly to watch Chloe from a distance. I worked at the clothing factory where Arthur got a job for Valerie, she revealed. For months, I watched my daughter grow up, always disguised among other mothers at school, at parties, at the harvest festival. I saw her suffering and was dying inside, but I was afraid of causing more chaos. The most stunning revelation came when Jessica looked at David. And I know you. We dated in high school, remember? You were 2 years older than me. David nearly fell out of his chair. The memories came flooding back. Jessica Santos, the green-eyed girl he had been in love with before meeting Martha. The explanation for his instant connection with Chloe finally made sense. Martha, who could have felt threatened by this revelation, surprised everyone with her reaction. That explains why you connected so quickly with her, and why I also felt it was destiny. For 3 intense days at the hospital, while Chloe recovered physically and began to emotionally process everything that had happened, the 3 women who loved her talked at length with the help of child psychologist Dr. Nolan. This girl has been through enough trauma for a lifetime, Dr. Nolan said. What she needs most now is stability and the certainty that she won't be abandoned again. It was Chloe who, in her childlike wisdom, presented the solution no one had thought of. During a play therapy session, she drew 3 women holding hands around a small girl. "It's my family," she explained to the psychologist. "Mommy Valerie, who raised me, Mommy Jessica, who made me, and Mommy Martha, who loves me, and Daddy Dave, who saved me." Inspired by the girl's drawing, they came to a revolutionary agreement. Jessica would assume legal custody of Chloe, but the child would live with the Davenports during the week to have access to the best education and financial stability. On weekends, she would stay with Jessica, who had rented a small but cozy house near the town center. Valerie, who was recovering with medical and psychological help, would have the role of a special aunt in Chloe's life. Arthur, who had reconciled with Valerie after understanding the full complexity of the situation, offered Jessica a permanent job at his new building supply store, which he would open in full partnership with David. 6 months later, during the next Harvest Festival, Chloe stood on the stage of the town square wearing a white dress that Martha had specially embroidered for the occasion. In her hands, she held a paper with a poem she had dictated for Jessica to write. "I had 3 mommies, and I didn't know," she recited in a clear voice that echoed across the square. "One who let me grow in her tummy, one who taught me to embroider, and one who raised me with love. Now I know that family isn't just about who shares your blood, it's about who stays together when everything gets hard." In the audience, Valerie, Jessica, and Martha cried with emotion, while David and Arthur, whose friendship and partnership had been strengthened through the whole ordeal, watched proudly at the girl who had transformed all their lives. Rick was never found, but the stolen money was recovered and placed in a savings account for Chloe's future. The girl, now 5 years old, had learned that true love doesn't abandon, doesn't hurt, and always finds a way to triumph over darkness. That night after the festivities, Chloe slept at the Davenports' house, surrounded by the embroidery she made with Martha, knowing that the next day she would go to Jessica's house to plant flowers in the garden, and that Valerie would come to visit her to tell stories about Grandma Connie. For the first time in her short life, Chloe fell asleep without fear of tomorrow, protected by a family that had discovered that true love multiplies instead of divides, and that sometimes the happiest endings are born from the most painful beginnings. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.